Well, here we are on a beautiful, beautiful, but a little bit cold Friday morning. And I'd say it's the same thing in Donegal, even in Donegal. Pat, is it?
Even though, yeah, the sun's shining here, but you're dead right. I think there's a wee bit of, for the first time, I noticed there's a wee bit of ground frost this morning.
Yeah, summer is going down the plug hole of time and is being replaced by
Absolutely.
the,
Yeah.
what would you call it? The fresh water of autumn.
Exactly.
Anyway, enough about that. Some terrible things are happening in the world. It's enough to make you blanch, really.
Mm.
And clearly, we'll have to talk about it. I'm sure people feel anything that has to be said about it has been said now. But I think there's room
Mm.
for some other few words about the
Yeah.
Gaza, Hamas, Israel situation. Um, what do you think, Pat? A question. What do you think is the main mistake commentators and journalists generally are making in reporting this? Or are they making any mistakes?
Yeah, no, Jude, I think this whole coverage is absolutely raises fundamental questions about our media, about our politicians, and about everything that's happening in the world, Jude. You know, it's there's really, and this is facts. It's not. This is not. The Israelis were allowed to treat the Palestinians as almost subhumans for so they blockaded Gaza for 17 years. The enclave. The Israelis determined who got in and who got out. They whatever. There's all sorts of there's 50% unemployment in Gaza. There, I think
Pat,
I thought it was something
80,
about
80% for young men.
80%, yeah. That Google said 60% or 50%. I looked up last week, but I heard people on the BBC said that's factually incorrect. It's
Mm-hmm.
80%. So fair play to you for the correction. The other thing was, I thought there was about 4,000 Palestinians killed. According to the latest figures, they said between 2008 and 2021, about 6,000 Palestinians have died. And by the way, Jude, I'm not lessening the impact on Israel, but only, and I said it in very commas, 300 Israelis have died in the same time. So there's a massive disproportionate. And there are only one place, people in that area that has an army, that has a navy, that has an air force, and has got American backing for laser missiles, etc. And that is Israel. You know, now that is not. Everybody seems to want to paint you in a corner. Oh, so you support Hamas? No, I don't. But I think the behavior of the Israelis, and they were allowed to get away with it for so long, they now reap what they sowed. And I am not for a 1 second saying that what Hamas did last week was justified or morally acceptable. Far, far from it. But the Israelis, their behavior, and uh, Senator Lindsey Graham was on Fox News
Yeah.
on, I think, Tuesday night. I don't know if you heard. Did you hear what he said? He said, level it. He was chanting about Gaza. So are they going to level 2.3 million people? And the other thing is, well, Jude, the hypocrisy of the media. They're saying these people are reporting the Israeli are saying to the Gazans to get out of their homes and all the rest. There's no way out. They can't, no matter where they go. There was a thing on Channel 4 last night. There were people who moved to their homes to go safe. They were killed in their rented or whatever, temporary apartment. If the borders are all shut off, where are the Gazans supposed to go?
Yeah.
And now, and on top, I'm going to wrap up. There's something morally bankrupt about people almost cheering in Westminster and Washington and Brussels when the Israelis turn around and say, we are going to lay siege on Gaza. No food, no water, no electricity, no fuel. When the Russians said they were doing this to Ukraine, also, what do you call it? Ursula von der Leyen last year said the Russians having a go at the fuel supply and the electricity supply for Kyiv were crimes against humanity. She hasn't said this now about Israel. Jude, and I sit and watch all this and I'm going, someone I am having a real look at what I believe in regards to Western democracy. There is some very, very serious flaws in it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I notice is that if in the early days, not now actually, things have changed, I think, in terms of reporting. But in the early days, immediately after the Hamas attack, if you had said anything about the background to this and the circumstances in Gaza, you would have had people who would have said, "So you are supporting Hamas, then, are you?"
I've heard that, Jude. Yeah.
I think that's disgraceful. Either people are so emotionally wound up that they can't think of what they're saying, or else they're being falsifying things. Because if you isolate one section and ignore all the rest, that's telling a lie, really. It's you're presenting a false reality. The second thing I would say is that things have changed in reporting. When Hamas attacked and killed all those people pretty brutally, it must be said, at first everybody came out, all the, as you say, the US, EU, UK came out and denounced it, full stop. But as days have gone by, more and more, and I took off my hat for once to Leo Varadkar. In the Dáil, he said it was a terrible thing that Hamas had done, and it was shameful, and they condemned it outright. However, he said, Israel should be careful because it has all the sympathy in the world, but if it acts in certain ways, that sympathy will leak away. I think in many instances, that sympathy is leaking away. I see it in any number of the commentators, the way the things are presented. People are showing what's happened to Gaza. My God, it's ridiculous. They're absolutely leveling towns and cities. So I think there has been a change, and that change will deepen. I think Israel had got a huge amount of sympathy for the awful things that happened. Now, when they see how they're reacting and their blank refusal to accept that there's anything wrong with what they're doing, cutting off water, cutting off electricity, cutting off everything. And now they're moving the people. Those people, remember we talked about this before, Pat. These people, 2.3 million living in a strip of land the size of the County Louth. And now the Israelis want them to push back and leave half of it empty. So they're going to be twice as dense. I think it's awful. I really do think it's awful.
But by the way, there's two or three things. I heard Alan Shatter, former minister, who is of a Jewish background, and he was a total apologist. He was on Monday night for on drive time and RT. Total apologist for Israel. Anything the Israelis want to do, well, Hamas brought this on themselves. And by the way, I should mention I was listening to Drive Time on I think Wednesday, and Simon Coveney was on, and he danced around the fact he was asked a couple of times would he condemn what Israel was doing, refused to do so. He was followed by Richard Boyd Barrett, the sort of people before prophet, and he was asked would he condemn Hamas. He says, "I am not playing this double standard game that you're at in RT," and he said that. Israel should be condemned for what it's, it's and all the rest. So he said, if you're not going to condemn Israel, I'm not. By the way, he was pulled off air. I have presumed Sarah McInerney, who's usually very fair and all the rest, she just wrapped it up very, very quickly. So I presume there was a producer get him off air, whispering or shouting into her ear because he refused to condemn Hamas. But what he wasn't refusing to condemn Hamas, he was refusing to get involved in the hypocrisy. So, Jude, I think in Ireland, you're expected to condemn Hamas, but there's no onus on you to condemn Israel. And the Israelis behave. Jude, anybody that looks at this thing factually, in 1948, if you look at the whole thing of Palestine, and look now how much the Palestinian people, how much land they had, and look at it now, how little land they have. Look at the treatment. The Israelis, the number of, like, remember what's was it Shatila or Shab? I don't know, 4,000 Palestinians in a refugee camp. The Israelis allowed the militia there to go and kill all these Palestinians. What the day the American embassy moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, there was 2,300 Palestinians shot by the IDF. 70 or 60 or 70 died. It was a turkey shoot for the and you can keep on going back. And the Israelis have turned off the water, the electricity, and all before. And the world sits back. And the Americans say, we and the Brits say, by the way, Jude, here, I'll just moving on because there's a thought going through my head. I'll forget it. The French are saying they're not allowing any pro-Palestinian demonstrations. The Germans are the same. Suella Braverman has said that the flying or the waving of the Palestinian flag could be what I call an offence of some kind, an inciting hatred. There's no stopping people flying the Israeli flag or demonstrating in favor of Israel. I have massive, massive questions about freedom of speech and my right to have my point of view and my right to say I totally disagree with Israel.
Yeah. The thing is, of course, as I said earlier, if you say that, if you say what you've just said in a public forum, they would say this guy's sympathetic to murderers, to terrorists, to Hamas. He sides with them and wanting to wipe Israel off the map. I think there's a couple of problems. One is, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
One of the problems is that whenever anybody criticizes Israel, the assumption is, oh, you must be anti-Semitic. You must hate all Jews. And I suspect, here's the truth. I suspect there are many in Israel and even many Jews who encourage that, you know, to see any comment, any criticism of the state of Israel as a blanket condemnation and a wish to wipe out the Jews. Yeah. We all have a big, you see, I think because so many Jews died in the Holocaust, I think the West in particular has a kind of a guilty conscience about them. And therefore, they are slow to criticize Israel in any way. Now, we have to apply the same moral standards. If we don't, it's just a joke. And it's it's pretty black joke, but we're very near to it now. You know, I watched your man Blinken saying, or maybe it was Joe Biden himself saying, we have your back. You have our unconditional support.
Joe Biden said that, but Blinken said it as well. Yeah.
And there's also a tendency to say, I was watching a guy on YouTube and he was making a point I thought was very well worth making. People say, oh, yeah, well, that's the Middle East for you, the Palestinians commit an atrocity, then the Israelis do something awful, then the Palestinians, tit for tat. But they wouldn't say in Russia and Ukraine, they wouldn't say, the Ukrainians they kill a few Russians kill a few Ukrainians. No question of that. These guys are right. Ukraine is right. Russia is wrong. That's it. And the very best you can hope for in terms of Israel and Hamas is for people to say, oh, it's awful the things that everybody's doing, including Israel. Yeah. That's the best you can hope for. I'll say it now. I think the pain and suffering and death that has occurred in the Middle East around Israel is largely a product of the Israeli state. Over the decades, they are the source of it, I believe. And I'm not anti-Semitic.
No, Jude, look, I guess the hypocrisy I'm getting more and more stunned by. Right, here's a sort of a scenario for you. Can you imagine if the Russians had surrounded Kyiv and said and announced publicly that they were cutting off the water, the food, the electricity? Can you imagine the outrage, the outcry in Washington from Biden and Blinken? Can you imagine Braverman and Sunak in Britain and in the EU, etc., that the dirty Russians are doing it? It's inhuman and all the rest. Yet they're almost sitting and applauding. Yeah, that's right. You're quite entitled to do this and all the rest. I'm shocked. And Jude, I should point out there was a woman on Talkback. I think it might have been Wednesday, a Jewish lady who said that Netanyahu and his right wing, they are fascists, basically. She said they are to blame for much of what's happened. Haaretz, the paper in Israel, has also said that he is to blame for much of what's happening here. So there are many, many Jews who are not, don't throw this one out that anybody who criticizes the Israeli government are as anti-Semitic. But Jude, it's one of the great plays now that if you criticize Israel, oh, you're anti-Semitic. Look what happened. I keep referring to Jeremy Corbyn. But Jeremy Corbyn was not anti-Semitic. He was pro-Palestinian. And there was, without question, a concerted media and campaign instigated, I would presume, by the Israeli lobby to undermine him and to sort of deride him, and it worked.
Well, you see, I often think that there's a certain reflection of our own troubles in the situation in the Middle East. Because you remember the famous remark that I've forgotten her name now, but she was a Fine Gael minister at the time, and she was talking to Gerry Adams. I think she was running in the same constituency in Louth. And Gerry Adams was talking about the various attacks that had been made on Catholics and on his own family and so on. And her response was, well, you know, you brought it on yourself, Gerry.
Oh, yeah, no, she's a senator now. She lost her seat, by the way. I know exactly. She always came across as like the head girl in the convent. Yeah, yeah.
The head girl nobody really liked. Yeah, so you had that same sort of thing. That if you said anything sympathetic, if you pointed out atrocities committed by the British, oh, you must be a Provo lover. He's a Provo. He's probably active himself, or his brothers or his sisters or somebody would be involved. You know, that was a mark of that, and people were afraid to speak out. People were afraid to say things in case they would be tied into and their lives might become endangered.
By the way, her name was Regina Doherty, if I remember correctly.
Right. Yeah. Queen of Heaven. Is there anything else? I saw Boyd Barrett, incidentally. I was going to say, is there anything else we need to talk about this? I saw Boyd Barrett speaking in the Dáil. And I think he must be the finest orator in the Dáil by a long way. He really has a nimbleness with words. He speaks with passion. He's informed. I can see why people, and he looks well. He's a good-looking little chap. I can see why his constituency keep returning him, despite the fact
here's one thing I meant to mention as well. See on RT, Simon Coveney was interviewed first, and then Boyd Barrett. I presume there was that Simon Coveney would not go 1-to-1 with Barrett. Boyd Barrett.
Good decision.
Because I presume surely if Coveney was so secure in his position and the government's position, they would have been more than willing to take Boyd Barrett on. They weren't, because Coveney was dancing around this and a refusal to condemn Israel for past misdemeanors, or past behavior, and yet the whole onus was on Boyd Barrett to condemn Hamas.
But to be fair now to Fine Gael, I have been impressed by Leo in the Dáil. On occasions, a couple of occasions now, he's said that Israel would. Really can't give a free pass to Israel to do whatever they want. Sure. This was a terrible thing that happened. Hamas is brutal, but you can't. That doesn't mean that they can then go on and do what they want. And this is the old thing of punishing everybody. Do they really think? Does Israel really think that they're going to finish? I've got to kill. I've got to. What did you say? Crush Hamas. He said. Now, did he really believe? Do Netanyahu and company really believe that their actions will put an end to armed opposition to Israel and to the way they're treating the Palestinians? Not on the contrary, I think they're doing Hamas's work for them. And somebody said they thought that was actually a trap that Hamas had set for them, that they knew that this would lead to a violent response.
Yeah, Jude, I have every sympathy, and I genuinely mean this. See what Hamas done. I actually find it physically sick what they've done. Like some of the stuff is apparently there are videos of it floating around. So I am not making any excuse whatsoever for Hamas. But what I am saying, Israeli behavior, you nearly sort of say, like, the hatred has now become so deep, like putting in $1 million missiles, flying them into apartment buildings and blowing children to bits. As I know, you see on TV now, people in Gaza running with dead children in their arms, etc., etc. And this has been going on for a very long time. And you sort of go, Israel can't keep getting away with this. And I'm not saying that Hamas are the answer, but hey, somebody somewhere has got to sit down and have a long look. The Palestinians have been treated so badly for so long. I think it's about time. that the real world powers said, look, once and for all, let's get something. Jude, if you remember the Oslo Accords, that was supposed to sort it out. There's supposed to be a two-state solution. What happened was Israelis
Oh,
kept knocking
yeah.
down houses. They
Oh,
kept stealing more land. They
yeah.
kept killing Palestinians. Nothing happened. And as long as the Palestinians were subdued by force, look, the world just turned the other way.
That's right. You have to take into account too, of course, the response of the West in terms of their politics. Rishi Sunak's taking the line he's taking because he's got an election coming up next year, which he may almost certainly will lose. And if he thought that throwing all his weight behind Israel would help, he thinks it does, obviously, then that's what he'll do. Not so much maybe from sympathy for the Israelis, but for sympathy for himself and his party. Joe Biden, a good Irishman, somebody we all cheered and were delighted to see replace Trump. He knows there is an election coming up next year. He knows his figures on the opinion polls ain't so hot right now. And he's going to do what he thinks will get him the most votes. I hate to be so cynical, but I don't believe that virtually any of the states that have been so loud in their protests and so concerned for the Israeli people, I don't believe that any of them did it purely out of concern for the Israeli people. I think in most cases, at least 50, 70, 80%, their own skin they were attending to rather than the skin of the Israelis. Maybe we've kicked this football far enough. Well, one last thing, just back. You mentioned babies there. And I was chatting to a man the other day, and he was saying, oh, God, the terrible things that you hear about them cutting the heads off babies. And at that point, his son came into the room and he said, I heard what you were saying. He said, there is no evidence whatsoever. That has been investigated. Did the Hamas cut the heads off baby? There's no evidence at all that this happened. Now, they killed a lot of people and they did in a brutal way, etc. But there is propaganda feeding into this as well.
Absolutely. That was put out by the IDF that they had beheaded babies. Joe Biden actually said it. Now the White House is resigning from that. It's rolling back. They're denying they ever sort of said it. They said, it's really propaganda that they did actually. Now, by the way, the Hamas did enough bad things, but of course the old one about beheading babies, like, what can you say? It didn't happen.
It's a bit like remember, you're much too young to remember. So am I. But apparently, was it the First World War? Britain was called to support gallant little Belgium because and there was talk about nuns being raped on tables and God knows what. All this was pure making up stuff, But that's the first casualty of war is truth.
Truth.
I don't know how it's going to end, though. How do you see it as ending, Pat? Do you think
Jude, I think right. It seems to be they're telling the people in Gaza to go south. As your point, I never even thought it was actually a brilliant point. If 2.2 million people are now being told to go to a quarter of the size of the place that they're already in, which is already the most densely populated places on earth. Like, I would like to know where the hell they're going to go. But anyway, Jude, I presume I was watching Jeremy Bowen on BBC last night. He says there's a massive a build-up of troops on the border. I presume they will go in. I presume as well Hamas has well planned for this. They'll be sitting waiting on them. They're probably in their bunkers and their tunnels, and there's going to be hand-to-hand fighting. It's going to be very rough. But Jude, one other thing, and before we probably finish up, see, when this is all over, I am giving you an unequivocal guarantee that these mass killings around the world that were in France, the Batan or Bataclan or whatever they call the place. Remember the ones in London, and they'll start up again. Because the hatred. Look what you've done to our people. This. So we will all pay a price for what Israel's doing now.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think actually Israel will pay a price as well, because if they go in and occupy the little bit of land that's there in Gaza, they're going to, we know what happens to occupying armies. Like, they might be in control, but there's going to be dead bodies of Israeli soldiers going back home.
Jude, one final thing. I don't know. I'm going to I keep hearing Israel has a right to defend itself. Do you consider what Israel is doing is defending itself? I think that is an absolute abuse of the English language.
Well, you see, they say, as I understand it, they say we want the Palestinian people to cough up Hamas. And this is the way we're going about it. We'll put the pressure on the Palestinian people, no electricity, no water, etc. And then they'll reject Hamas and throw them up. I mean, that's quite a time-honored state terrorism act. I mean, we had something of that with not state, but with the loyalists here. The idea, as they clearly admitted, is give the Catholic population such a bad time, not necessarily connected to the IRA at all. Give them such a bad time that they'll cough up the IRA and not have them in their midst anymore. And they say the same thing about Hamas. I don't think that's going to work. But anyway, we can live in hope, I suppose. Anyway, what else have we to talk about? Oh, yes. Did you see Katie Hannon's program during the week on TV where she was talking about assisted dying?
No, I must add.
Very interesting. Apparently, they're looking very carefully now at a possibility of passing a law for the South. Now, you pay attention to this, Pat, this kind of relevance to you, whereby people will be allowed officially to assist others to die. And they're talking about people with incurable diseases and terrible pain and so on. Now, they had on, I'm trying to think who the people were, but I know Brian Darcy and some doctor were on one side saying they didn't approve of it, and they had a couple of other people on the other side, and I'm trying to think desperately who they were, but I can't think who they were. But what would your own gut reaction to that be, Pat?
Jude, I know someone. I don't like the idea of death. I don't like anything.
Not kidding myself.
It frightens the shit out of me. But anyway, here's the thing. I know I was sort of within my family circle, not directly in my family. A young fella, his mother had terminal cancer, and I am later learned that she was in such pain, and it took her about 2 days to die. But that young fella was traumatized by watching what his mother went through, and I mean traumatized. And he told me what he called it. Had he been able to do something, he would have done something. So Jude, and this guy loved his mother to bits, and you know what I'm talking about as well. That I think, see, if you heard a dog screaming in pain, you would do something to help it. If you could, if you were any sort of humanity in you. And see, when you see somebody in absolute agony and they're not going to they're terminally ill, if that person sort of said to you, look, please take me out of my pain. Now, I don't like the idea. I'm not a big supporter of it, but I think, see, and what would you say? What's that one that Hobson's choice? Yeah. I think if I could help somebody, I would think it was the greater good.
I have a lot of sympathy with that view. In fact, I'd very nearly echo with your words. However, there was a couple of things brought up. I gather, for example, I think it's Holland. Assisted dying has been put in place.
It's in Switzerland as well, Jude.
And there's places, states in America that allow it. Yeah. But the point I think that Darcy and that doctor were making, well, the doctor said, first of all, this notion of people being in terrible pain and therefore they needed, assistance to die. She said, actually, she works with people in hospices and so on. She says there are very, very few people who actually suffer from terrible pain as they move towards their death. I must say I find that very encouraging. But, there are a lot of people who would cite instances, as you've just done, where that was not the case. The other thing you see they seem to be afraid of, I think, is that once you put it in place, people will say, all right, you're going to assisted dying is okay with X, right?
Yeah.
What about assisted dying with Y? And what about assisted dying with Z? For example, here's a person who's been suffering from they've been suffering from Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
They've got to the stage where they can't do anything for themselves.
Yeah.
Would they not be better off dead? You get to the stage where you'd say people who are old and can't look after themselves, they
Yeah.
can't wipe their own backside.
Yeah.
Isn't there no dignity to their life? Wouldn't they be better dead? The danger is the movement, the creeping movement.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jude.
forward.
I'm not arguing. That's that you've sort of elucidated the sort of where I would my thinking at, because I would worry about that too. But I know once you agree one thing, you move on to the other, but that still does not obviate the argument that
Oh,
I originally
no,
made.
far from it, Pat. I'd be 100% behind you. I can tell
Yeah.
you, look at me, Pat. I am
Yeah.
totally opposed to pain, especially if it's
Yeah,
applied to
same
me.
here. Oh,
I'm not
absolutely.
I'm not good at suffering. Very, very bad at
Uh,
suffering.
no,
So,
nobody is. But Jude, hold on a second. Wasn't there a guy, I think, in the Irish Times, maybe it was you said it, about palliative care? Not all palliative care works.
well, this woman seemed to, the doctor there said that in virtually very few cases was it necessary for a person to be suffering terrible pain in their final days. Here's the
Yeah.
thing, Pat. We know that doctors
Yeah.
have drugs, right?
Yeah.
They know the doctors could administer really drugs that would be life shortening, but they would have in
Yeah.
mind the idea of killing this pain rather than killing this patient. Are we not proceeding reasonably well with that as it is? I think that even
Yeah.
was this doctor that said that, who would be opposed to this assisted dying. I think it was she
Yeah.
that said, you're perfectly entitled, and in fact, you're doing the right thing as a medical person to administer drugs to people, even though they may shorten their life. They mightn't live,
Yeah.
They might only live another 2
Yeah.
weeks rather than 4 weeks or 6 weeks or a month.
But there's a friend of mine who was a doctor, and he said for two things. The patient was somewhere in Donegal, and he was based in Derry, but he used to take him out heroin because it's the only thing. This guy had terminally ill.
Yeah, yeah.
What he call it? He said first of all, what he was doing was probably technically illegal, but there's a medical name for heroin. I can't remember it, but anyway, but he was injecting your man because that was the only thing giving pain relief. And another colleague said to him, that man's going to become addicted to that. And my friend turned around and said, Jesus, give us a break. The man's dying. He's only about a week left to live. Does it matter if he gets addicted?
I thought, Pat, that would be quite common among doctors. Where you have somebody who's suffering terrible disease of some kind, and they're obviously going to die. I would imagine that it's pretty well standard that doctors administer.
I've just remembered, isn't heroin and medical terms called diamorphine?
I don't.
I think that's
I'm
what's
not
called.
sure. Yeah, it probably is actually.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd be totally in favor of that. Drugs. My little experience with drugs, and I don't mean recreational drugs. I mean drugs for getting your teeth done or having an operation.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember I had a lump in my back, and the doctor said, "You want that removed? It's okay, but it'll interfere with your beauty." So I said, "Yes, I want to be beautiful. Take that thing off my back." So they injected me in such a way that I could hear them cutting the sort of lump off my back. You know the way the sound of you doing a lump.
Yeah,
I could hear that, and it didn't bother me one bit. I said, "Oh yeah, that'll be that bit they're cutting off me now." Drugs are amazing. They're so instant and they're so clean and there's no hangover. There's a lot to be said for them. But again, as I say, I'm wondering where is the gap that they feel it's necessary to put this in legislation? Because in fact, it seems to me that most doctors follow that path anyway. I mean, they don't say, I'll kill this guy. They say, I'll kill his pain if I possibly can.
Yeah, but someone. You see, you could come down on either side, and you did. I give the first side, you give the second side, and I think any reasonable person could say I can see both sides. So I am not sure what's the right way to go in this. Like I personally think if someone's terminally ill and in pain, and it just doesn't want it, can you imagine being doubly incontinent and feeling you know you're dying mentally, it's destroying you. And you say, look, I would rather go now than hang on here and watch it. Surely that should be your choice.
I think I would sift out a wee bit what you said there. doubly incontinent, tough.
Yeah.
Somebody better look after me. I had looked after them when they were wains. Somebody better look after me now. So they mentally not too sharp. I'll take that. But I'm talking about pain. That's where I draw the line.
Exactly. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, it's going to come to us all. The question is, in what circumstances will we find it? I will leave clear instructions. If I'm suffering pain, administer whatever drugs are necessary to me and double them then. After you've done the first part, do another one. It's like Christy Moore said, he was asked, was he going to get the injection for COVID? And he says, yes, please, both arms at the same time. Anyway, I think we've cleared up the world now. We've dealt with personal pain and we have solved the Middle East crisis. What more can we do for people? I mean, do they realize how lucky they are to have us giving them all this wisdom twice a week? I'm glad you mentioned that on that Radio Foil interview you did the other day.
Yeah, I give you a mention.
You did. Well, you mentioned yourself too. You said, I do it along with Jude Collins. you didn't say, the good bits are his and then the bad bits are mine.
Right, Jude.
Okay, Pat.
Excuse me. See you Monday. See you Monday.
Yeah.
See you. All the best, Jude.